Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. An amazing day of activism, an amazing day of people taking to the streets, and a show of power by the coming generation. Today is one of those days that history will remember. This week really is a week that history will remember. And it's only Wednesday. Understand, you had in Kentucky thousands of public sector workers, teachers, people taking to the streets who, would never have done that, would have never imagined that they had the ability and the capacity to do what they did in Kentucky. You think about what happened in West Virginia, same thing. People who never in a million years would have thought that they would have been in that kind of an activist scenario. But there they were. Yesterday, you saw the amazing victory in Pennsylvania's 18th congressional district with Conor Lamb overcoming really insurmountable odds. A 20-point deficit, an enormous spending deficit, and a sitting president coming and holding a huge rally in opposition to you. And then today, all across this country, in school districts, in every city, every county, every state across this country, taking to activism. Now, I know where my kids go to school, we'll have a moment in the gym, which, I'm a little frustrated with, under the guise that, we're going to keep you safe because there could be a shooter out there. And if that's the thought, I was thinking about this all day today because, I was thinking back to, how my mind works and how if I were a teenager, the idea of having adults telling you how you can protest and the idea of having teachers tell you how you can engage in civil disobedience would really have sent me off the deep end. And, I look at this control of what's going on and the attempt to co-opt what these kids are doing. And look, these are the leaders of the future. And I spent today thinking back to our civil rights tour a couple years ago, where we were down in Birmingham, Alabama, and met with, just some of the most wonderful people that you will ever meet, who, when they were in high school, were bailing out of windows, heading out back doors, going through the kitchen, heading out the bathroom window to get to the 16th Street Baptist Church to engage in civil disobedience. And once they got there, in groups of 50, they were sent out into the Bull Connors tanks and to the barking dogs and the water hoses. Because they wanted equality. They wanted to be treated with dignity and respect. They had demands. They had been meeting and training and learning and understanding how to frame their message and how to engage in peaceful civil disobedience. And these kids have been doing the same thing. The thing that's amazing is every time I turn on a news report and a reporter sticks a microphone in one of these kids' faces, that kid has the message. They know what they want. They know when they want it. There are no stragglers. And I know I get the right-wing frames. Well, they're just a bunch of kids who just want to go out of school for a little bit. No, these kids understand Because understand, this is the generation that has grown up with this reality every day. The reality that every door is locked. The reality that at any time, who knows what could happen. Now, I remember as a kid growing up, and you do the drills under the desk, if you remember. There could be a bombing, or there could be a hurricane, or there was the magic desk. The desk would solve all your problems. Just hide under the desk, and whatever. If the bomb fell on you, you'd still be safe under the desk. And everybody knew there's no bombs falling from the sky. That's not going to happen. If a bomb actually does fall, the nuclear winter hits, and we're all done anyway. So we all kind of knew it was a joke. But this generation of kids going to school every day, living with the reality that quite possibly there could be some idiot with an AR-15 with a bump stock walking in the door and taking out a couple of them. And every time one of these reporters walked up to somebody, it didn't matter where it was, whether it was Philadelphia, whether it was New York, whether it was Washington, D.C., whether it was out west, whether it was Podunk, Iowa, the kids knew what they wanted. And it isn't thoughts and prayers. It isn't more political wrangling. It isn't, oh, well, we don't really know anything. And I'm so tired of hearing that kids are being told, well, you'll learn more when you're an adult. You just don't understand. No, these kids do understand. They understand that 14,000 kids have been killed since Sandy Hook. They understand that 14,000 people have lost their lives. And if you saw the video, they had a video, it's somewhere online, where they went and they took shoes, 14,000 pair of shoes, and put it on in D.C. on the lawn. And when you see that number of shoes gone, that many bodies gone and just shoes left behind, I mean, it was one of those moments where you just, my goodness, what have we allowed to have happen? And all because a handful of people believe it is their absolute, unfettered right to have a weapon of war. No one's talking about coming and taking everyone's guns away. And this is where it just blows my mind how the NRA and the NRA-bought politicians and their sycophants are out there going, they want to take all the guns. Nobody's talking about taking all the guns. First and foremost, we're talking about getting war weapons out of the hands of people. Look, if you want a rifle to go hunting with, good on you. You want a shotgun? Good on you. You want a handgun to keep in the house? Good on you. These weapons, these high-capacity magazines, these bump stocks, it wasn't too long ago that the Trump administration was actually thinking about allowing silencers to be legal. And you stop and you think about just how insane we've gotten. How crazy we've gotten on the gun issue. That these kids, hopefully, will bring some moral clarity back to our politics. And, someone asked me today, what do you think is going to happen once they get out of school? And I said, I think what's going to happen is these kids have grown up in the social media environment, that they don't need to go to school to be able to connect with each other. That they will stay in contact, and there will be the next generation of activists grow out of this. There will be the next generation of politicians who grow out of this. There will be the next generation of business leaders who are going to lead us in the right direction. This is a good thing. This is a good time. Unfortunately, the issue is a horrible one. The fact that kids are dying in schools. And while we're talking about arming teachers and doing other nitwit things, because interestingly enough, it was reported this morning, and you can't make this up. It was reported this morning that a teacher brought a gun to school and evidently was doing some kind of a demonstration. I guess wanted to show how it was unloaded, and shot a bullet in the roof of the ceiling of the school. And debris came down and injured one of the kids. I guess he had cuts on his neck. Originally, it was reported that the kid actually got shot. But here's the thing. And look, it was misreported that the kid got shot, but he could have been shot. Now, this teacher from California, this guy was a part-time policeman with police gun training. This guy is, someone who Donald Trump would have said was one of the trained ones. And this is what happened in this Seaside, California school. And you go, more guns in the school? Definitely not the answer, especially not in the classroom. We have gone nowhere near having an honest conversation about this issue because it's all right now. The messaging all right now is to discredit all of these kids who are out in the streets. That's what this is really about. And the hope from my end is that they continue. Now, the next march, I guess, is coming up on March 24th. That's going to be a huge one. They're saying could be bigger than the Women's March. They're saying that this could dwarf that. The question I come back to is, will our elected leaders, will they listen? I mean, granted, you had Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, out in the streets of New York, laying in the streets with the students in a die-in, in his fancy suit. You had that today because everyone wants the photo op. Everyone wants to put their arms around the kids and embrace them. But will they actually act on what is in front of them? Now, I've been spending a lot of time, consuming right-wing media. And I got to be honest, it's mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. The level of distraction, the level of deflection, and the level of just insanity. The left, they just want to take your guns, all of them. We're going to be standing around with spoons. Of which they tell you spoons can kill people too. So by the way, you can guns sometimes, but trucks kill people, don't you know? And forks and spoons and water and air, all those things kill people. We're going to ban those too. And my response is simple. I'll take my chance against the spoon, the fork, the water, and the air. I'll take my chance against that over someone with an AR-15 and a bump stock and a magazine, high capacity magazine. I'll leave it right there. I'll take my chances. Again, more deflection, more, hey, over here. Never mind this. Over here, stupid. Which is where this arming teachers stuff, this is where this comes from. It's a distraction. It's to get us to argue about something else other than it is the gun. That simple. And this whole nonsensical argument of good guy with a gun. Well, there was a good guy in a classroom in California. And what'd he do? He shot a hole in the ceiling and hurt a kid in the front row. It could have been not just the ceiling. He could have blown a hole in the kid in the front row. And I'm sure he would have been perfectly sorry for it. I'm sure he would have been. But you know what? There are a whole bunch of people sitting in the VA right now who are sorry that they shot somebody in war. Not a teacher going to school who accidentally shot a kid just because we won't deal with our problems. So today, again, what I think was an incredible day of activism, and the hope is that out of this comes a learning experience, and that being that they actually have some power, that they actually have some clout, and I hope they use it. I hope if they focus it, I hope they stay on task, and I hope they push our elected leaders in the right direction. Just my thought. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Share your thoughts. Do we have guns on everyone? Should everyone be carrying a sidearm like the mythical Wild West? Should we have an AR-15 on the blackboard everywhere in every school? Or should we come to some bit of sanity and understand our gun fetishes have gone a bit too far? Love to hear your thoughts. rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back with our good friend Eric Robertson. Stick around.
10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1915. That was the day British socialist illustrator Walter Crane died. You have probably seen his Art Nouveau style illustrations. Many celebrate International May Day, memorialize the Haymarket Martyrs of Chicago, or commemorate the Paris Commune. He also published a series of illustrations titled Cartoons for the Cause. That series was produced to commemorate the International Socialist Trade Union Congress of 1896. Born in 1845, Crane apprenticed with the Chartist radical William James Linton. He started his career illustrating children's books, nursery rhymes, and fairy tales. He later traveled to Italy with his wife Mary to continue with book illustrations and portraiture. Upon his return to Britain, he became friends with artist William Morris, whose pamphlet, Art and Socialism, deeply impacted him. Crane soon joined the Art Workers Guild and the Arts and Crafts Society. Together, he and Morris joined the Social Democratic Federation. Crane produced illustrations for its journal, Justice. From there, he helped to found the Socialist League and illustrated its journal, The Commonwealth. When the League failed to gain popularity, he moved on to the Fabian Society, whose members included George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, and Sidney and Beatrice Webb. Crane produced wildly popular images like the Angel of Freedom and published The Claims of Decorative Art. In it, he asserted art could not flourish in a world where wealth was so unfairly distributed. Only under socialism could use and beauty be united. He continued to publish and became principal of the Royal College of Arts in 1898. A strong critic of the British Empire, Crane supported the Labour Party and produced posters each year to celebrate May Day. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
There was no one at home, but it was cool. It was just all cool. Now it's over for me, and it's over for you. I believe the world is burning to the ground. Oh well, I guess we're gonna find out. Let's see how far we come. Let's see how far we come.
Yes, let's see how far we've come. Let's see how far we can go. I look at today as just, like I said, one of those amazing days of activism, of people taking this idea of self-governance to the right level. Active, engaged electorate, engaging in telling our elected leaders what we, the people, want. I think it's a great day. And the reality is these are the next generation of leaders. So to see a day like today, and like I said, every time someone stuck a microphone in one of these kids' faces, they were spot on with their answers. And here to talk about today's activism and maybe how we move this energy from today and hopefully the march coming up on the 24th into electoral victories and into real change. I've asked our good friend Eric Robertson to come talk with us. He's now Southern Region Political Director for the Working Families Party. Eric, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, glad to be back.
So,
been a little while.
What'd you think about today?
Well, I said it on Twitter. It's like, the people that did this walkout today, and the people who have been going out on strike and who are likely to go out on strike over the next few months. These are the people that are going to lead the next American Revolution, man. I mean, this is the generation where the people that are going through these experiences, I believe, are having formative experiences that are going to project them to make the real long-term, structural changes this country needs.
From your lips, and I think you're right because, I talk to people all the time here on the program who, one of the questions I ask someone who, may be out in the streets, like the woman from Kentucky the other night, I said, have you ever done this before? And she's like, no, I never thought that I would be doing anything like this, but I'm learning and I want more of it. And it's this kind of empowering experience.
Oh yeah, no, it's transformational. You go through an experience like a strike or a walkout, or one of these other kind of mass actions where you're actually having to challenge sort of a built-in taboo, like sort of fear of an institution, and you overcome that fear with collectively with a bunch of people, I mean, that changes your life. That changes the way you look at the world. And it really fundamentally changes what you understand as being possible, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I saw your tweet that went out earlier today with the picture of a little girl with a sign, and it said, you know, the walkout leaders of today are the picket line captains of tomorrow, and you know, spot on.
Oh yeah, no, I really believe that. I mean, I really believe if you go back and you look at the people who became sort of the first generation of African American union leaders, those were the folks who were part of, got involved in the civil rights movement in high school and college, you know? So I really mean it when I think like these people going through these experiences are just they're in the pipeline to sort of intersect with history, where they're going to sort of run into a situation where they A, understand it being completely intolerable, but B, also have some idea that it's not something that you have to accept, that you can change it.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting you went to that place, because you remember we came down to your neck of the woods during our civil rights tour a couple of years ago. And that's one of the things that I've been talking about. We met a lot of people who were in their 60s, who were in their 70s, who were the teenagers of that era, who were jumping out of windows, who were walking out of class. And I think of, as I said earlier, the people who in Birmingham
getting shot with fire hoses.
Exactly, in Birmingham, who jumped out of the bathroom windows and out of the classroom windows to go to the 16th Street Baptist Church, to be sent out to the dogs and the fire hoses and the tank. It just, it's that kind of memory.
I think it's very similar to what obviously that's a fundamentally kind of more, that's a more powerful experience, I think, than any of us have had to deal with, you know what I mean? But I think the fundamental fact of is when people go through experiences where they begin to understand sort of the power of people mobilized collectively, it has a transformational effect, whether it's, getting, obviously something much more dangerous, like, getting shot, having dogs sick on you and fire hoses, or some of the things that the, Black Lives Matter protesters have had to deal with. But all these people are going through these experiences, but I think this today and the things that are happening, like in West Virginia, are happening on a scale that is transforming, like, a layer of people, a generation of people.
I agree. But, here's the thing, and I wanted to, maybe get your thoughts on this, because, I absolutely agree. The dogs and the fire hoses and the tank, life-threatening stuff. But these kids are also, because the right wing likes to post it as, well, they're just getting a little time off from school. There's no real sacrifice here. This generation of kids are being beat up and attacked on a whole different level than I think most of us understand. And that's, through social media and through the attacks that come that way. And I'm not saying that they're as deadly as the dogs and the tanks, but they are not nothing.
Well, no, and I think it's a different kind of, tenacity and bravery you get. It's a political bravery. It's a tougher skin in terms of standing. It's different. It's just different. I mean, but you're right. These folks are definitely going through they've gone through tremendously traumatic events at the high schools where these shootings have happened. But then the sort of, I think there's a element of these folks all around the country all of a sudden realizing, when am I going to get shot? Or people who are dealing with situations where they're getting shot, by police and things like that. These folks are just, I think they've realized that that the powers that be literally are not willing to save their lives.
Yeah. So how do you see this playing out? Because you're someone who's been a longtime organizer. You've worked on campaigns and this, because I'm of the mindset we could be at a movement moment. This could start this, we're at the beginnings, I think, but this could really spark a movement towards real action and demanding politicians not just to come out and lay in the street with them and take pictures with them, but to actually do something.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting to a number of cumulative factors that are sort of intersecting, where we could be hitting what you're calling a movement moment, where I think sort of like the 1963, in the civil rights movement, 1968 for the the anti-war movement, where you just everything kind of collides. And the fact is you have a much more intransigent power structure right now that is much more ideologically committed to an agenda that is, completely counter to what these young folks are about, And so, yeah, I think the real question in terms of the movement around, gun control or school safety for the, people in the schools and what the issues that these folks are talking about is whether or not they have the staying power once they get the brush off, because they're getting the brush off.
Or once school lets out in June.
How long are they going to sustain the movement beyond that to translate it into electoral victories, but also to translate it into a broader mobilization that really, draws in bigger and broader forces to the point where they not only can they not ignore it, they get, tossed out, they get voted out because there's such groundswell.
Right, and that's where one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, because as your career has gone on, as you've been a part of these things, the question is how do those kids who are leading this movement, how do they take what they're learning, what they're doing, and move it into more than just holding a rally and making noise, but into electoral wins and policy wins and all of that? Is there a way forward, do you see?
Well, I think that there's a lot of ways forward. But I also think, it's part of one of those sort of give and take moments where I think the older generation has to sort of let these leaders really cut their teeth and provide assistance and guidance and things like that, and offer up advice where we where it's actually needed and where it's asked for. But yeah, I think that. There's beyond what's happening there with these young folks. You have this, explosion of left-wing young folks who are flooding into different organizations. DSA getting over Democratic Socialists of America, getting over 30,000 members. Organizations like Our Revolution are popping up chapters and giving people vehicles to run as progressives and independents. And then, of course, the Working Families Party, doing things like, in New York right now, taking on the independent Democrats and trying to basically get a real progressive majority in New York, so that the will of the people actually gets carried out. And then talking about down here where we're actually trying for the first time to build organization, independent, working class, progressive organization in the South that is, sustainable and organizes at scale, and that can be that independent voice to in these elections, so that people don't feel like they're, necessarily, that gives them an alternative to where they feel like the party doesn't necessarily meet their needs in terms of being active in social movements and that kind of thing.
No, I think it's important, and as I've talked to people here recently, it's this idea of having that message in every congressional district, in every House race, and having someone out there carrying the water, if you will, and fighting for those. Even if you're going to take a beating, you're still fighting for it.
Oh yeah, I tell you what, it was really cool. I think we're going to see a bunch of surprise victories in Georgia, but also around the country in what would normally be considered to be very Republican areas. But, and I think, like you said, I think we only ensure, the only way we know for sure whether we're going to win in those areas or not in this race is whether we have a candidate in the race, and it's been really amazing. And we've just had a slew of progressive candidates get in races in Georgia where we haven't had candidates in a long time. We had two special elections in these rural districts a few months ago where a Democrat hadn't run in those areas in 30 years.
Wow.
And two House seats just got scooped up, just were won, by Democrats.
Wow. So let me ask you this then. Is that just the energy of of people who maybe have not voted before or were registered and didn't bother? Or is it that, or is it that, the Republican voters are looking at their party and going, you're losing me, and gone the other way? Is there any research on that?
I think it's a bit hard to tell, but I think all the signs seem to be pointing more towards voter enthusiasm, probably some depression and enthusiasm among the right wingers, who are consider themselves maybe moderates. I don't get the sense that a ton of moderates are jumping ship, or moderate Republicans, but I definitely think it is happening on some scale. I think it's more, but I think these victories are going to happen because people have a sense that up and down the ballot, we're facing basically people who are aligned with an existential threat to everything that we hold dear. So I know people say you can't campaign against Trump, but I'll tell you, when people are talking about getting out there and voting, they're thinking about kicking the Republicans' asses because they are afraid. They see what Trump is willing to do, and so they know these folks are going to go along with it.
Yeah,
and
it's amazing to me how quickly the Republicans threw Charlie Dent under the bus. I mean, there were tweets all day today. Charlie Dent's not a real Republican. He's been a Republican for a long time, because he had the audacity to come out and say, look, Republicans, you better prepare yourself for the hurricane wind force that could come through. You better start preparing because trouble on the horizon.
Oh, I mean, look at all the people. I mean, these people aren't retiring because they're tired of getting, taken to resorts by,
the American Legislative Exchange Council, and
they're not retiring because they're tired of doing that stuff. They're tired because they're retiring because they understand that the winds are blowing, and they I think many of them have a sense that it's just like they just rather get out of it because it's also hard to defend.
Yeah.
They're going to know they're going to have to get out there and defend, administration that's, indefensible. And you sound like a real jackass when you don't, when you defend some of this lunacy,
Yeah, absolutely. So last question I've got for you, and if you had advice to give to these kids who are passionate right now and active and engaged, what would it be?
I'd say study the movements of the past, and not just sort of what people present as sort of the history of those movements, but the actual ways people organized. In particular, organizations like SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I would say take a long look at how those folks approached organizing, because they built movements that knew how to win.
That's good advice. Eric, I appreciate the time. I'll look forward to talking to you again. And, hey, congratulations on the new gig.
Well, thanks so much. We're going to get out there and do everything we can to turn this state upside down.
I know you will do a great job. And as things pop up, let us know.
I'll do it.
Thanks so much, our good friend Eric Robertson. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day that participants in the famed Bread and Roses strike gathered in Lawrence, Massachusetts to celebrate their victory. The strike had begun in January and was a hard-fought battle. More than 20,000 textile workers, most of them women, speaking more than 20 languages, participated in the action. It was a powerful stand of workers' solidarity across ethnic lines. On March 12th, the American Woolen Company agreed to most of the strikers' demands. In the days that followed, other companies also agreed to terms. The workers gained between 5 and 25% raises depending on their jobs. They also gained overtime pay. The ripples of this impact flowed throughout New England. It's estimated that 150,000 textile workers saw raises in the aftermath of the historic work action. At the gathering to commemorate the strike, leader of the industrial workers of the world, Big Bill Haywood, addressed the crowd saying, "You are the heart and soul of the working class. You, the strikers of Lawrence, have won the most signal victory of any organized body of working men in the world. You have demonstrated that there is a common interest in the working class that can bring all its members together." Despite the significance of this strike, the story is not taught in many of our schools. In 2011, the Zinn Education Project found that only 2 of the 10 major U.S. history textbooks discussed the strike. Today, let's take a minute to remember those brave women who declared, "Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too." For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith. The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
I got to be honest, I'm kind of struck at how some of the pundits on the far right are saying that the election of Connor Lamb was just a fluke. The Democrats couldn't possibly replicate it. He was to use the Paul Ryan frame, a unique candidate. And I would go, no, I don't think he's unique at all. I think there are a lot of veterans running on the Democratic side, a lot of folks who are talking about the issues. I got to tell you, where I think is different is there's a lot more engagement, a lot more people taking to what's going on and eyes open, feet in the street. And I think, if this continues, bloodbath in November. But here to come talk a little bit about yesterday's big election in Pennsylvania's 18th Congressional District, I've asked Nate Lerner to come talk with us. He's a grassroots director for Build the Wave. Nate, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, always great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So what do you say to the argument that, that election, it was a fluke? Granted, Trump won it by 20 points. Granted, there hasn't been a candidate that bothered to run in the last couple elections. It was just a fluke.
I mean, that's some Kellyanne Conway level spin there. It's wildly inaccurate. It ignores really basic facts, that a lot of which you just pointed out right then and there, which is 2 years ago, literally the last election cycle for this race or for this district, Trump handedly won it. The Republican incumbent didn't even have a challenger, and he, in his previous elections, didn't have any strong opponents either, who he just ran right over. This was the 115th most competitive congressional district, if you look at the numbers, and it should have been a slam dunk for Republicans by all means. And they, not only did they drop the ball, but they were handedly out-campaigned by Democrats and by folks getting involved from all over the country. And
I also argue, the power of organized labor. I know that a lot of people are trying to dismiss the strength that union members have in this country, but that district, they were out in full force.
Absolutely. I think if you look at Pennsylvania, that's a place where unions are still very strong, and they have a very strong presence, and you see it in races like this where they can make all the difference. And one thing I like to point out, too, is, a lot of people like to compare this upset to Doug Jones, but I would say in a lot of ways it's almost bigger because Roy Moore was very heavily disliked in the state, but Rick Sarcone, he was pretty popular. He was a veteran also. He'd been a relatively successful politician in a more moderate area for 8 years. He had a lot of name recognition. He was well-liked. He wasn't, great, but he wasn't an absolutely crazy person like Roy Moore was. And also the district, there were very few minorities there. Doug Jones got a lot of assistance from an amazing turnout of African Americans. That was not there in PA 18 because it was a very, very white district.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And look, for me, in looking at this, I think Lamb was a very good candidate for that district. But more importantly, I think Sarcone ran on the Trump message. He claimed to be Trump before Trump. He ran on the same bad policies, and I got to say, this is that district, pushing back on what has happened.
Yes, I mean, Trump is still pretty popular in that district. He turned out a big crowd, but I think people are fired up about the Trump brand and Trumpism and the general intolerance that he preaches. A lot of these backwards views, I think there's still, unfortunately, a little too much enthusiasm for. But Trump as a whole, he's not really getting folks motivated the way he used to. And Sarkozy was not able to tap into that either and get Republicans fired up. They did not turn out in good numbers. And if anything, it really fired up Democrats there and pushed a lot of the moderates who are not satisfied. So Trump is still popular, but really in a shrinking base of supporters, while everyone else is coming to the left.
Now, I look at this, and the question then becomes, what lessons do other candidates learn about how to run a campaign? Because there's a bunch of messages for me in this, that if you run on Democratic principles, if you run a good candidate, Democrats can be competitive anywhere.
Yep, and he's really the perfect example of how we can win in more moderate areas. He wasn't everyone's dream liberal candidate, but he was still a strong Democrat. He didn't shy away from that, and a good candidate is going to win really no matter where you put them if they run a strong campaign and they believe in what they stand for, which he clearly did.
Now, in looking at as you pointed out, there was a lot of groups doing a lot of on the ground work. And look, this is an exciting time for engagement. This is an exciting time for activism. We're seeing people in the streets from places, West Virginia, Kentucky, all across the country today. Kids out in the streets. What's this cycle going to mean to kind of harness that activism and move it into the political realm? Do you see that happening?
Yeah, I hope it happens. I believe it will. I know there's a lot of great groups out there doing a lot of great work that are working to make it happen. The important thing, though, is that people understand that this work matters, and it is going to be the difference maker. You see, the polls show that in general, Democrats are more popular now, than Republicans by a mile. But at the same time, what's really going to help in those gerrymandered districts, what's going to help in those areas with a lot of voter suppression, those really, really tight races, is this big wave of grassroots action on the ground, pushing those extra voters out, bringing those moderates over, getting the base fired up. That's, I think, what made the difference in this race is just everyone coming in and helping out, and that's what's going to make the difference nationwide. Yeah. So it's not enough just to rely on anti-Trump sentiment. We need action, and so people need to stay engaged and involved.
So in looking at Connor Lamb, because I've had a bunch of people emailing me and say, well, he's no lefty. I go, but he's right on the issues, and I think someone who's more moderate, as long as you're right on the issues, I don't think it really matters, does it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's funny is I remember I was promoting Connor Lamb pretty heavily. We definitely want to get the word out, and we got a little pushback for it because some folks said, he's not liberal on this or that. I think he's a little more moderate on gun control. But I said, look, if you want someone who's actually going to fight for common sense gun laws, as opposed to being resistant to any sort of reform, we need a Democrat in office. If you want someone who's going to hold Trump accountable as opposed to going over him, we need a Democrat in office. If you want someone who's going to protect the ACA, we need a Democrat in office. It doesn't matter who the Democrat is in many cases. It just has to be a Democrat. That being said, there are a lot of districts, like this race coming up in Illinois, where we want progressive Democrats leading into the agenda and pushing away. But a district like this, where you had a 19% gap to make up for just 2 years ago, you really needed a candidate that more moderate conservatives could get behind, and Connor Lamb fit that bill very well. Doug Jones also fit that bill well. But I think in our more safe districts, we definitely need to push for progressives to be our candidates.
So is the lesson out of this maybe to have, the Democratic Party as a whole, that maybe the national party stay out of these local elections and really allow for local candidates to kind of fight it out to get the best candidate possible?
100%. I think it's the perfect example of that. There's the argument is made by the national party that, they want to step in and make sure the right candidate runs and wins in certain more moderate places. But look what happened here. We had this is a district where you needed a moderate candidate, and one of them stepped up. Voters recognize that, and the party, they're not stupid. They can tell, they know their district better than anyone else does. They know who's going to win in their district. They're going to pick the right man or woman for the job. We saw that in Texas as well. And maybe some of the candidates were a bit too progressive for the Republicans there, but that doesn't matter because if the base is fired up, if they're working really hard every day, if they're donating, if they're involved, they're going to turn out Democrats in record numbers, and that's going to make the difference. So we need to leave it up to folks on the ground who actually know those districts better. And the way the party can help is by bringing in money, not by telling people who should run and who shouldn't.
Right, and not by micromanaging the campaigns either. But you
Exactly.
you bring up the fact of money, and look, this Connor Lamb was horribly outspent, as I think most Democratic candidates are going to be, because a lot of them, and I think Lamb was one of them who didn't take corporate money or PAC money, if I'm not mistaken. And we're seeing these pledges across the country where Democratic candidates are kind of pushing that off. How do you run campaigns when you're going to be so badly outspent? Because you're not going to have all the energy and all of the bodies that you had, like in PA's 18th for this special election, for every election.
Yeah, I mean, that's really a balancing act. And I think, again, this is where we need to be pragmatic. If a candidate wants to do that, that's great. Then we need to really come to their aid and push for them and fight for those candidates harder than we do for others. But we can't hold against those who don't, because the reality is that in this day and age, it's still very, very difficult to win without that kind of money. And if you're not a well-known candidate, the best way to get your name out there is still television, sadly. And that requires a lot of money, and you'll just get crushed if you have a Republican who's 10 times better funded than you are. So that that can be a really big difference maker. But on the flip side, small dollar donations can make all the difference. We're seeing that right now with Randy Bryce, with Beto O'Rourke, with my organization, Build the Wave. All the work we did was entirely built from small dollar donations, and without that would have been absolutely impossible. And it adds up very quickly, and people need to recognize that $10, $25 can make all the difference for a candidate.
Well, we heard all during 2016, $27, Nate.
Exactly.
So let me-
what is it for Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, so let me ask you, about your group, Build the Wave. Who started it? How did you start it? What's the goal? What are you doing with it?
So I'm the founder of the organization, but I want to focus primarily on grassroots, so I've fallen into that role. We're actively bringing in other folks right now, working here on the ground with friends of mine, including the Brooklyn Young Dead. But we're currently building this effort where basically we want to start connecting Democrats with the races that matter. That's our message. We wanted to recognize that it's not just the race in your backyard that's important, it's what's happening nationally. In Alabama, the race last night in Pennsylvania, this is a perfect example of why this matters, because you get folks from all over involved in these races. That really pushes the needle pretty far. It makes a dramatic difference. But a lot of people don't know which races to get involved in. It's not like a special election where it's, we have one race to focus on. It's not like Randy Bryce or Beto O'Rourke where you have a high-profile Republican that you want to defeat. There's a lot of these hidden races that are governor's races, Senate races, congressional races, what have you. And folks really just don't know about them because there's so many elections coming up in November that we have to pay attention to. So what we're going to do from now to the spring is help people find these races, help them get involved. We found text banking is incredibly effective. We sent almost 100,000 texts for Connor Lamb, and we're looking to do similar efforts pretty much on a weekly basis for different Democrats throughout the nation that we've identified as critical.
And I look at this, and the lesson I think I'm hoping people will take also from this PA 18th is that there wasn't a candidate in that seat for a couple of elections, I understand, and the ones that they had were just kind of placeholders. To me, it's almost we're at this point where Democrats have got to do what Newt Gingrich did back in the 90s and, almost guarantee that every race has a candidate. Every race has some support. And like groups like yours connecting people together, I think this is a good thing.
Absolutely. And what's so critical of running everywhere is that it can really make a big difference nationally and make a big difference in the long term. We need to be thinking big picture. We have a long road ahead of us. It's not just 2018, it's 2020, it's 2022, 2024, and so on. And so, if we get competitive Democrats running in places where we didn't see that before, that's a huge money drain for Republicans. This race alone, Republicans dumped $10 million into when they should have had to spend zero. Think about that. That's a lot of money you're going to donors to ask for, a lot of money they're going to corporations to ask for, and now they have to go back again after having lost in a couple months for November races. It's not fun to do that. And then when they have to start doing the same thing for races that, again, should be slam dunk, it's a huge resource drain. And then also you're building up this coalition, this base of local Democrats who are activists, who are involved, who know there's They're building up this political infrastructure locally for Democrats when you run competitive candidates. So you may not win in 2018 if you're a new candidate in a very difficult district, but you've started to build up this infrastructure that will pay off down the road. That's how we win in these really, really tough places like Pennsylvania 18, where Republicans have a stronghold.
And the other part of it is, something I've said, for years, is that even if you're going to take a beating, you go out and you fight the good fight. You get your message out there. And sadly, in a lot of districts, especially in Pennsylvania, for House races or Senate races, there's no one running for those races because the state is so badly gerrymandered. But for me, it's always, there should be someone at least putting the message out and fighting the good fight.
Yeah, Pennsylvania is especially gerrymandered. It's pretty horrendous. And I think that's a great point. And Bernie Sanders, I think, speaks very, very much to that. I remember the first reason I donated to him was because I simply wanted him to get his message out there. I really liked what he was saying, and I wanted more people to hear that. And what's funny is I talked to a lot of other people who had the exact same feeling. They didn't really think he was going to win. I didn't really know a ton about him, but I liked what he was saying, and I wanted more people to hear that. And if you say good things, if you bring good policy ideas to the table, and you're authentic about it, people are going to get behind you, and you'd be surprised how far that can carry a candidate, especially this year. Yeah,
I donated to Sanders' campaign because he was the first person I ever interviewed on this program back in 2005. Because he was right then, and he's right now. And to me, on the issues, I think we need people like that. And it's good that we've got folks like you who are out there bringing people together. Last question I've got: if folks want to volunteer, they want to be part of building the wave, how do they do that?
That's an excellent question. They go to buildthewave.org. They can also Twitter at Build the Wave, or look up our Facebook, Build the Wave. We're still pretty new, but we have found tremendous success with text banking. We had over 250 volunteers, then almost 100,000 texts, and that was just in the final weeks of the race. We're going to be doing this every week for a different candidate. It's a really good way to stay informed, to get active, especially if you're not a huge fan of talking on the phone. It can make all the difference for these candidates.
Every point of contact possible, I guess, right?
Absolutely. And it's like I said, it's what's going to really move the needle in these really close races, like we saw last night.
Good stuff. Nate, I appreciate you taking some time for us. I'd love to have you come back again as these races heat up and things get moving on down the road to November.
Absolutely. Always happy to.
Good stuff. Thanks so much, Nate Lerner. He's the grassroots director at Build the Wave, buildthewave.org, their website. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1954. Marking the powerful labor film, Salt of the Earth. Salt of the Earth told the story of striking Chicano miner members of the International Union of Mill and Smelter Workers, Local 890, against the Empire Zinc Mine in New Mexico. The three filmmakers had been blacklisted by Hollywood because they were accused of holding communist sympathies and because they refused to testify before the House Un-American Committee of Congress. The filmmakers had difficulty finding actors willing to star in their film. Undeterred, they enlisted a handful of actors and then cast members of Local 890 in the rest of the roles. They also met with community members to discuss the script. The result was a moving testament to the power of workers and community. The film depicts how the women of the community took up the role of picketers after the courts had barred the union men from demonstrations. But not everyone was pleased that this story was being told. Local media began railing against the film. Congressman Donald Jackson of California called the film a new weapon for Russia. Soon, protesters began to show up to disrupt the filming. Someone shot at one of the actors' cars. Fortunately, he was not in it at the time. After filming ended, the problems continued. Editing studios refused to touch the controversial film. Few movie houses would show it. The film did, however, find acclaim abroad, especially in Mexico and France. 2014 marked the film's 60th anniversary, and several special screenings took place from New Mexico to New York. This incredible worker story is finally receiving the attention that it deserves. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
American workers versus multi-billionaires want to end Social Security and Medicare. Well, millions in this country don't have a dime to spare. Can Main Street get a bailout? Tell the president our checks weren't mailed out.
There's the question. Can Main Street, can we get a bailout, please, soon? Because it looks like we're setting up the next great collapse as we speak. You think about, you go back to the Great Depression, the policies that led to that. You think about the Bush collapse, the policies that led to that. It was tax cuts for the very wealthy and deregulation, especially of the banking institutions. And here we are again, already giving away the boat and the baby in the bathwater to the very wealthy with the tax bill. And now today, the Senate, in a 61, I think 37 vote, decided that, hey, you know what? The banks aren't too big to fail anymore. And we're going to go back on a good portion of Dodd-Frank because, hey, they learned their lessons. They won't do it again. They're good banks now. Evidently, under the current law under Dodd-Frank, banks that have assets more than $50 billion are considered too big to fail, and they're subject to some pretty tough regulations. We want to know who you're giving your money to. We want to know that you can pass a stress test. We want to know that if the next collapse happens because of these horrible policies that Trump and the Republicans continue to ram through, that you can withstand, and that, well, we're not going to have another 2008. Well, the Senate passed their bill that would raise that $50 billion cap, not to 60, not to 70, not to 100, but to $250 billion. So that means like organizations like Ally Financial and Barclays and American Express, nothing. Don't worry, you're fine. I got to be honest, 50 billion sounds like a lot, and maybe you could bump it up a little, but 5 times a 500% increase, to me that just seems like we're screaming for trouble. It seems like, again, we're doing the dumb stuff of going, the banks learned. They won't do. And I remember the 90s. I remember Graham Leach Bliley, and I remember these idiots going on about how the banks learned. They won't do what they did in the Great Depression. We can undo Glass-Steagall. They won't collapse the economy. And it was only 8 years. And the bottom falls out. The banking institutions are collapsing. And oh, by the way, we the working people of this country, we're the ones who suffered. We're the ones who bailed them out. We're the ones who lost our homes. We're the ones who lost our jobs. We're the ones who lost our retirement. We're the ones who lost opportunity for 10, 12 years. In fact, the study we talked about last night, people who lost their jobs during that Great Recession, they're still behind everyone else. They never catch back up, and we know that. We don't need studies to tell us that. But here's the thing, and I love the other side. I love the people who say we need to get rid of these onerous banking killing regulations. They say that by doing away with these regulations, what will happen is the banking institutions will have billions of dollars extra a year that they won't have to spend on compliance that they can then use to give to shareholders and engage in buybacks. Exactly what they did with the tax breaks. Again, we were told, no, they won't do that. Trust us. We won't. It's in the mail. Trust me, it's in the mail. And I guess I'm just tired of being lied to, because this thing's being sold as it's going to help small banks. It's going to help credit unions. It's going to help those community people. It's going to help the people in rural North Dakota. Well, guess what? North Dakota has a state-run bank. They didn't have any problems during the Great Collapse. Why? Because they didn't do all the risky nonsense that the too big to fail banks did. They didn't do all of this, the gambling and the speculation. They followed good, sound banking principles, not because they're smart, not because they're good fellows of the society, but because there are laws on the book that mandated that they didn't do dumb stuff. We are saying, no, go ahead, do the dumb stuff again, because we'll bail you out, brother. But, you know, those poor people who need food stamps, those kids who need education, those poor people who need health care, screw them. We, the bankers, need our share, man. And I'm just struck by every person that I've read, and I've read a bunch of articles on this. They've all said, well, we need to get rid of the onerous regulations. They're just too cumbersome and time-consuming. Do you know why we have cumbersome, time-consuming regulations? So you idiots don't screw us again. We've learned, and I keep coming back. When do we learn? Or do we ever learn? Bank collapse, savings and loan collapse. Go down the list. Do we ever learn? At some point, I got to say, please, I hope we do. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. If you're listening on a station that picks up only the first hour, head on over to thericksmithshow.com. Pick up hour 2. For everyone else, right back with our good friend Sarah Burris from Raw Story. Stick around.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
Proud defender of the working class majority. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. What a great day of activism today was. Kids across the country out into the streets. And to me, the funny part was watching the right wing lose their mind and trying to say, oh, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know why they're there. They just want to go out for a walk in the park. They just want to leave school. And then you hear the pundits saying, you know, it's so hard to defend guns. No, it's not, especially when your pockets are full from the NRA. You know what's hard to defend? How idiotic you sound when you defend someone wanting an AR-15 with a bump stock and a large capacity magazine. That's what sounds stupid. Just my thought. And here to share some of her thoughts on the day's events and also some of her stories, I've asked Sarah Burris to come talk with us. She's a reporter over at Raw Story. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick. How are you?
I am good. So really an amazing day of activism, no?
Yeah, no, it was exciting. And I think one of the things that I'm the most excited about is how many of these young people are about to turn 18 or are 18 already, and they are going to vote in the midterm election. And I can promise you they're not going to vote for NRA-supported candidates.
Well, at least you hope. At least you hope not. I mean, I look at all the money the NRA is trying to spread around to get the mouthpieces and the pundits on the right side are on their side. I'm hoping that they remember come November.
I think they will. And I think, too, they don't buy the whole spin that comes out of the far right, the conservatives, the gun nuts. And I mean, I shouldn't even say the conservatives. There are so many conservatives out there, my parents, for one of them, who absolutely support sensible gun regulations. So these NRA people, these far right people are so far on the fringe that it's so outside of the mainstream. And I mean, you were talking about these people who are talking about how hard it is to defend the Second Amendment. Like somehow they're the victim because they have to defend what they believe. And it's like, no, you should defend what you believe. You should have to defend what you believe if you're, one of those people that's far outside the mainstream. So I loved today. Today was wonderful. I loved the crazy Republicans trying to justify their own spin and say that that these young people didn't matter and that they won't matter. And I think as long as they keep saying that, I think young people will show up.
Write them off at your peril, in essence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like that's sort of what happened in 2008 with, the first branch of the millennial generation. And boy, that election was tough for Republicans.
And the hope is that, the next several, because, I look at 2008 and I've been going back to this, and maybe you've got some thoughts on it, because, I looked at that election and there were people at the time saying no one's ever going to vote for a Republican again because the economy, free fall. We were losing at one point 1 million jobs a month. Millions of people were losing their homes, millions of people losing their jobs. Everybody lost huge money on their 401ks. And I remember people saying we were never voting for them again. And yet here we are just a short period later, and we're doing what appears to me to be the same dumb stuff over again.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons that you didn't see millennials really come out as much in 2010. We passed these banking regulations and it was Democrats right along with Republicans. So I feel like the Occupy movement was a big part of that, where young people sort of saw both parties as being like, you're both owned by the big banks and you both are responsible for ultimately what has happened to our economy. And now you're exactly right. We are about to do the exact same thing. It's a joke. It is an absolute joke that we're putting, Wall Street banks on welfare under the guise of we need to help community banks. My mom works for a community bank. All right. They don't have 250 billion in capital, right? Like that doesn't happen. Nobody needs that for a small community bank. These are the major crazy people that need, companies that need this. And I mean, we're going to end up in this situation again. Like this is going to happen again. I'm terrified of it. Like I'm going to start stuffing my mattress full of cash.
I mean, and the thing is we've seen these movies over and over again, and yet for some reason we keep paying to see the sequel.
I know, and I don't understand it. I mean, there's got to be some way off this crazy train. You know what I mean? Like, Jane, stop this crazy thing.
Exactly. But, here's the thing. I think most average everyday people get we shouldn't be letting the banks off the leash. They've learned that if you let them off the leash, they're going to bite us in the behind. So you keep them tied up. To me, the average person gets that. Why is it that our elected leaders don't seem to get that?
Because they're paid not to. I mean, that's right down to what it is. If you pay somebody enough money, then they'll think whatever you want them to think. That's what the NRA has done. So, I mean, I think it's exactly the same for all of the big banks. When people need to do whatever it takes to win their seat, to keep their job rather than do their job, I think that's what we end up with.
Yeah. Last question I've got on the march today. You saw President Trump come out, and there was that conference that he had where he basically said, we're going to do all these things. Bump stock's gone. And it seemed like he was on board to do, all the things that these kids are demanding. And now it seems like he's forgotten.
Well, he had lunch with the NRA. I mean, it was 3 or 4 days after the shooting, and he sits down with the heads of the NRA after saying, all of these things. And I think they had that come to Jesus moment where they were like, so you told us you would do this. And if you don't continue to do what we tell you to do, then you're going to lose the next election.
And we'll send Sam Nunberg out again.
Right? That'd be awesome.
What exactly is with this guy? I mean, he had the mental breakdown, and our media allowed him to do it. In fact, they encouraged it. They let the crazy guy go off. And there's part of me that goes, that was part of the plan, so that we would all think he's crazy and not believe anything he says. Now he's going the other direction where he's saying, this isn't a witch hunt. I've been warned. I warned Roger Stone to stay away from that Assange guy. Am I missing something here?
I was really surprised by that. But when you think about the way that Roger Stone is in general, it kind of makes sense that Nunberg would be Mueller. It's not about what Roger Stone did illegally. Then it's all of a sudden about, Nunberg being crazy on TV. So it's like this total misdirection, which I feel like the Trump people are like experts at. So, I mean, I think now you wonder if that conversation that he had with Mueller, where he had to tell the truth, And that's what he talked about in the most recent interview that I saw. He said, you know, I didn't do anything wrong. So the only thing that could happen to me is if I went into that room and I didn't tell the truth. Like, that's how they would get me. That's how I would go to jail. So I had to tell the truth. And he described exactly what he saw and what he heard. And he didn't, you know, give any opinion or anything. He just sort of stated the facts. And you know, you look at the facts and you look at what Roger Stone said and you look at what Nunberg said, and they don't really match up. So that looks a little sketchy to me.
One way or another, somebody's going to jail.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Paul Manafort's going to go to jail for the rest of his life. So,
yeah, and in fact, there's a judge that just said that. There's enough evidence. He believed, that Virginia judge said he believed there was sufficient evidence to think he could spend the rest of his life in jail, and actually questioning whether he should be out because of, you know, all of the context he's got around the world and all the resources he could possibly have. He's a flight risk. And I got to wonder, why is the guy out? Because if it were you or me, you know where we would be?
Yeah, I mean, we'd be stuck at home. We couldn't get out on a private plane.
No, we'd be stuck in the Gray Bar Hotel. We'd be guests of the state.
Oh, true,
in
yeah.
a 6x9 cell, looking at Bubba going, hey, Bubba, how are you? We wouldn't be in the luxury of our homes.
No, definitely not. But, I mean, this is Paul Manafort. And I think that what was interesting, I feel like a lot of legal experts have been saying, you know, these are serious charges. This is a big deal. What the judge said to Manafort was, I don't think you're taking this seriously. Like, I need to explain to you that you will spend the rest of your life in jail. Like, I mean, the judge actually saying that to you is completely different than Jeffrey Toobin on CNN, right?
Exactly.
Like, he's standing in the courtroom being like, dude, take this seriously. And I don't know that Paul Manafort really is.
It's going to be interesting. Let's move on to really the most important issue, the issue that is gripping the country every day, and that's Stormy Daniels. I can't believe that's funny.
I know, it's so funny.
But it's one of these things that's so absurd that we're still talking about her, and evidently now, I guess, a second lawyer. It wasn't bad enough that Trump's first lawyer took out a mortgage of $130,000 to pay her off to shut up. Now there's a second lawyer involved.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing about Stormy Daniels. We go through all of this stuff. We've got mass shootings. We've got, you know, us basically selling out to the big banks. All of these really terrible, just completely heartbreaking issues that are killing us. And it's like the chocolate dessert of the news is the Stormy Daniels. It's like, you can't not enjoy it. You can't not laugh at it or, you know, make fun of it or at least see it and smile a little bit. So this is just another example of basically the Trump campaign doing whatever it'll take. Or at the very least, you know, if perhaps all of these people that work for Trump were acting independently, all of these people trying to cover for him. And that to me sounds a little bit like a conspiracy.
It sounds a lot like it, you know, and maybe we should be looking into that. But here's the thing. I'm going, you know, to be honest, unless he's got a prenup that would allow Melania to have half of his stuff if he committed adultery, which, you know, given his track record, I don't know why he'd be dumb enough to sign.
Right.
I don't know why he just go, yeah, it happened. So what? Leave. I'm not forking out all this money. I mean, it just seems to me, because you got to know that's who he is anyway, which is why I don't think the American people are looking at this with any surprise. I think most people are like, yeah, that's what we voted for.
I know. And the thing that's crazy is, I mean, at first I really felt sorry for Melania, right? Like, she's in this really crappy situation. She's locked up in the White House and can't really go anywhere or do anything. She's just trying to raise her kid, for the love of God. And, you know, I think whenever you first started hearing about a lot of this stuff, it seemed like she wanted out. I mean, the look on her face, the slapping away of his hand, it just seemed like she wasn't into this anymore. And it feels like something flipped where either they made a deal or they have an understanding that she'll hang on until, you know, he's out of office or something. And I mean, that's the sad part. But at the same time, you want to turn and be like, dude, you know what you were getting into here. I mean, he was basically having an affair when he was picking out his second wife. And then he was, I think whenever he met Melania, actually, he was at an event with someone else, some other date that he ditched to talk to her. So it's like, this is who this man is. So she had to know.
No, I mean, it is what it is. And look, there's part of me that goes, if Melania's okay with that, it's none of my business. It was the same thing with, with Hillary and Bill. Their problems are their deal. Let them deal with it. Not my business.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. At the same time, I do feel bad for her. I mean, it just seems like she's locked in the White House, and that is Barack Obama talked about it being one of the loneliest places, one of the most isolating places. And you think about it with Melania, who never goes out, who never does anything publicly, it's got to be even worse.
Yeah, especially with him, with his Twitter fingers and executive time, all that alone executive time.
Yeah, he's got to spend his special Fox News time.
I wanted to ask you about on Sunday. I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes a little bit with billionaire Betsy DeVos. Did you happen to take a look at that?
Oh yeah.
Are you as kind of freaked out as I am by having someone that incompetent as the head of our education system?
I mean, look at what the hearing was. I mean, she went into that confirmation hearing being completely oblivious to most things.
I get that. But you're a year on the job. You should have learned something in a year.
You should have been smart enough to hire a press person who would at least prepare you for this.
Exactly. I mean, she's a billionaire. She can afford it.
She can totally afford all of these things. And the fact that she could have a press person would be paid for by the federal government. Like, this is not something that, she couldn't handle. But for some reason, she is just completely oblivious.
I mean, she's got so much money, she could hire someone to clone someone who's smarter than her to sit for that interview.
She could have a double.
Like Saddam Hussein had hundreds of doubles. Yeah. We could have a Betsy DeVos double that was
smarter.
Smart. Actually understood what the job was. Just this is what it was. My favorite part of the interview, though, and there were a couple parts that cracked me up, was that she didn't intentionally walk into a failing school. And
what does that even mean?
What does it mean?
Oh, I caught that too. That was the one thing that really stood out to me where I was like, that is a weird word choice. Like, why would you say she hasn't intentionally? Like, did she just accidentally stumble upon an underperforming school and be like, oh, whoops, sorry, my bad, I'm going out.
And she backs out the door.
Right? I mean, I know that I want to say maybe the first week or two that they were, that she was in office, she went to a Washington, D.C. school and got booed out of the school. She had to escape through a back door.
No, they wouldn't let her in. I thought it was they wouldn't even let her in.
That's right. They wouldn't let her in. And I mean, look at this person. She is not well loved. Teachers hate her. Principals hate her. Administrators hate her. Everybody hates this woman. I mean, just alone, speaking from somebody who runs a news site, people love to hate Betsy DeVos. People will constantly talk about how much they hate her on our website. And I'm just right there with you. So, I mean, she just is so oblivious,
because more than 90% of us went to public school. More than 90% of the country goes to public schools.
Mm-hmm.
We all have an attachment to our local school. Public schools may be failing, but ours are doing well. That's just basically the mentality.
And we all have that amazing teacher, right? Yep. We all had that one teacher that really took us back or made us want to do what we do. And so when you bash teachers, so many Republicans and Betsy DeVos do, it just doesn't compute with the rest of the country.
Yeah, I think back to even the teachers I didn't really like were still smarter than her.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I mean, even the gym teacher who showed up drunk half the time, he was still smarter.
Right. Definitely.
But I look at it and I'm watching the interview with my 9-year-old daughter.
Oh.
And my daughter looks at me at one point and goes, Dad, is she going to ever answer the question? And, for a 9-year-old to look at this and watch this interview and watch this woman and to see, through her attempts to deflect and not answer the questions, pretty glaring.
Yeah. And that the rest of the country thought the same thing. And that's why she's one of the least liked people, in the cabinet. So the fact that she can't do her job, I don't know if you saw there was a report that came out from a government watchdog group that showed that she doesn't show up to work most of the time. I think she leaves on a Thursday and doesn't come back until Tuesday. So she's working a 3-day week. And
whoa, stop. Isn't that enough? I mean, really, I'm okay with just going, Betsy, just go home. Just go home. Stay home. Don't do a thing. I feel the same way about Trump. Yeah, he's golfed over 100 times in 300 and some days. A quarter of his time spent on the golf course. You know what? Let's do that 100% of the time. You can't F things up that way.
It's the same with the State Department. I think whenever Tillerson was out, they showed a chart of all of the people who are gone, whose positions haven't been appointed, like the undersecretaries and all those people. There's one guy. There's literally one guy who's taking care of the entire State Department right now, because either people have been fired, they've quit, or Trump hasn't nominated anybody. And I mean, this is their plot to spend less government money. They're just not going to hire anybody. But I mean,
well, what it is,
I
I think,
works.
it's not that. It's because they're spending all of that money on travel and on dinette sets and on on doors for Zinke's office and on helicopter rides. They're spending it. Don't worry. That's not the problem. It's that, if you don't have anyone in those positions, nothing can get done. And that means the billionaire friends who just love deregulation can rake in the cash.
Exactly. And I think, too, it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, Republicans love to say that government is completely useless and government doesn't do anything. If they create a government that doesn't do anything, then it matches their talking point.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up Rex Tillerson a minute ago. Do you believe that he didn't know he was going to get fired? He had no idea and he was blindsided and that he learned about it through Twitter. Do you buy that?
I kind of do. I mean, I know that John Kelly, people were saying that John Kelly called him over the weekend. I mean, he was in Africa. Why would he be in Africa if he knew he was getting fired? Because that's one hell of a depressing plane ride home.
Yeah, that's a long walk home because you
That's
can't come back on the government plane. No, you're fired.
So, I mean, I don't know. I think he was trying to play the game. I think he was trying to kiss Trump's ass as much as he could. And then something just happened. I mean, a lot of people have said that Trump never got over the fact that he called him an effing moron, but I mean, maybe that's what it is.
Honesty. I mean, and look, the thing is, Trump said they disagreed on things. Don't you really want people that you might disagree with to be able to, to challenge your view so that maybe, I don't know, taking the Hair Summit with the crazy guy in North Korea, someone to say, hey, Don, buddy, you might want to rethink that. I mean, don't you really want that kind of give and take so that you can maybe flesh out if I don't know, going and sitting with a really crazy person is a bad idea?
President Obama used to talk about that how important that was for him, and it was something that people did in the Senate when he was in the Senate. And as president,
but here's the thing: Obama's not president anymore, and I gotta keep saying that because Sarah Huckabee Sanders reminds us of everything that President Obama didn't do, thinking that he's still in office.
I know, but I mean, you look at the history of all of these presidents and how they lead and what they do and how they form decisions and the Bin Laden decision where they went around the table and asked every single person, and then he went back to his office and really thought about it. And I mean, this is deliberate leadership. These are people who take the gravity of the position and understand the breadth and the depth of their power and how important it is for the rest of the country. Like, they see a real pride in the service that they provide, Republican and Democrat. And Trump is not that guy, and he's never going to be.
Well, I mean, the reality is after the Betsy DeVos interview, Howard Dean tweeted out that Trump's cabinet is a cabinet of doofuses, right? And you look at this Walter Schaub guy who he's got his theory. I've got mine. On the job application, the first question they ask is, do you know what the agency does? No. When can you start? Question 2, do you want to destroy the agency? Yes. You're hired. I mean, that seems to be exactly how they hired people.
For some, it seems like they checked a box for, did you support the president? Did you donate to his campaign? For people who are loyal to him, I mean, this goes back to all of the people he's ever hired too. Anybody who is loyal to him, he wants them around him. And everybody's been talking about how, Tillerson was never somebody who was a Trump loyalist. He was somebody who Republicans thought would be a good guy in the office. And instead, they were looking at, who would be good people to put in these positions to do whatever the hell the conservatives wanted to do. And I don't think that those people were necessarily Trump loyalists. And So you see him sort of replacing a lot of these people with people that he can trust, with people that, you know, he knows will agree with whatever he says, whether it's sensible or not.
Like billionaire Betsy, or the big announcement today, you're going to get a TV commentator as our top economic advisor. Really?
You know what's crazy is it's like, I get it if you want to have a crazy conservative economic person involved. It's different, though, with somebody who has been proven to be an idiot over and over and over again from the left and the right. Like, universally, everybody thinks that this guy is an idiot. So, I mean, of course, put him in the Trump White House and have him advising on everything economic. I'm sure that'll help with us.
Crazy, crazy times. But Sarah, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the work that you guys do there over at Raw Story. I look forward to talking to you again real soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good stuff, Sarah Burrish. You want to check out her stuff. Amazing coverage of all of the things we talked about and more. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1915. That was the day British socialist illustrator Walter Crane died. You have probably seen his Art Nouveau style illustrations. Many celebrate International May Day, memorialize the Haymarket Martyrs of Chicago, or commemorate the Paris Commune. He also published a series of illustrations titled Cartoons for the Cause. That series was produced to commemorate the International Socialist Trade Union Congress of 1896. Born in 1845, Crane apprenticed with the Chartist radical William James Linton. He started his career illustrating children's books, nursery rhymes, and fairy tales. He later traveled to Italy with his wife Mary to continue with book illustrations and portraiture. Upon his return to Britain, he became friends with artist William Morris, whose pamphlet, Art and Socialism, deeply impacted him. Crane soon joined the Art Workers Guild and the Arts and Crafts Society. Together, he and Morris joined the Social Democratic Federation. Crane produced illustrations for its journal, Justice. From there, he helped to found the Socialist League and illustrated its journal, The Commonwealth. When the League failed to gain popularity, he moved on to the Fabian Society, whose members included George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, and Sidney and Beatrice Webb. Crane produced wildly popular images like the Angel of Freedom and published The Claims of Decorative Art. In it, he asserted art could not flourish in a world where wealth was so unfairly distributed. Only under socialism could use and beauty be united. He continued to publish and became principal of the Royal College of Arts in 1898. A strong critic of the British Empire, Crane supported the Labour Party and produced posters each year to celebrate May Day. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Your proud defender of the working class majority. Rick Smith.
Truth of the matter is Wall Street not all that thrilled with Larry Kudlow either. As the stocks dropped today. And it's one of those things that makes you go, I don't spend a lot of time watching the ups and downs, the roller coasters, the roller coaster ride known as Wall Street. I don't watch it all that closely. But it's one of those ironic little notes that they announce him to go and everything falls out. And when Gary Cohn left, it went up. It's just kind of one of those things that it's just kind of poetic justice, if you will. Now, for me, again, I keep coming back to this banking thing, and I got a couple emails from folks saying, I can't believe we're doing this. What kind of blankety blank morons are running things. And it's true. It makes you wonder sometimes what we are doing. And this is where the team sport mentality bothers me. There are a number of Democrats that voted for this, and you go, what exactly were you thinking? And now, they're your corporate Democrats. They're going to get their Wall Street money. They're in really conservative states that are, look, they need the corporate cash if they're going to stay in office. So they set up a scenario where they team up with the Republicans to create this environment where, again, we're going to be on the hook for the next collapse because it's coming. In fact, we just set up an IRA for my daughter, and we're having this conversation about how to look at Wall Street and how we're setting this up for 50 years down the road for you. So we're going to put money into it, and you're going to put money throughout your life into this, but you're never going to touch it until you get to the end, and all of that stuff that you I wish someone would have told me at 15 and 16. But we were talking about, the idea that, you're going to have these hills and valleys and, you're going to have several recessions between that. And, she's like, well, why? And I'm like, because we're stupid. Because we have to. And I'm going, because we have to, because the rich people need to fleece the poor people. And this is how we do things. Don't ask why. It just is what it is. And it got me thinking about, again, we're doing the same exact stuff that caused the Great Depression. We're doing the exact stuff that brought us the collapse in 2008, the stuff that happened during the Reagan years, all of the tax cuts for the wealthy, all of the deregulation. Don't worry about it, banks. Go ahead, do what you got to do. And there doesn't seem to be any historical understanding. And I know we're an amnesic society. I get that. It must be in the water. Because, I remember as a kid, my mother worked in a nursing home. And I remember after school, I would go there and sit with, different people throughout the day until my mother got off work at 5 o'clock. And, so I would spend at least 2 hours every day listening to people tell their stories, people who were in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and had lived through the Great Depression. Their work lives were those Depression years. And, they were in the last days of their lives, and they still remembered those greedy you-know-whats who, collapsed the economy. They still, the one woman I still remember had like a coffee can that she kept her money in. I didn't trust those damn bankers. I mean, it was really quite amazing. Those people did not forget. Here we are just 8 years later, and we've already forgotten. What? Recession? Something happened? Really? What was that? Can you find that on Wikipedia? Can you Google that for me? Oh, gee, that's too much work. And I don't know, again, I don't know if it's in the water. Maybe it's the fluoride in the toothpaste. I know, I got some tinfoil hat people telling me that's a way of controlling the world. Maybe it's the radio waves. I don't know. But what I do know is that it was just 8 years ago. It was just, 8 years ago that we were digging out of this massive collapse. 2008, just a decade ago happened, and we dealt with it through 2009, 2010. All we heard about was austerity and tightening the belt. And all we heard about was, we got to cut spending and cut spending, and we got to cut jobs, and all of this stuff. And we got to give more money to the banks, and we got to give more money to corporations. And yet we didn't make people who were really harmed by this, we didn't make them whole at all. And my fear and my frustration is we're at a time where, right after the Great Recession, after the 99 weeks people were getting for unemployment because the jobs weren't coming back, after, state systems were, more pushed to the brink. I know Pennsylvania, was in big trouble because they had to borrow a bunch of money from the federal government to cover their unemployment insurance because they didn't bring in enough revenue. And I look at Pennsylvania as kind of the poster child for all of the things not to have done. Instead of saying, you know what, we need to raise revenue into our unemployment compensation system. We need to prepare for the next collapse because we know it's coming. What they did is they froze benefits. So for a decade, the benefits that people would be able to collect from unemployment are going to be frozen at, I think it was 2012 numbers for a decade. And they actually gave employers a tax cut. They actually cut the amount that employers had to pay into the system. And you go, what sense does that make? And the truth is, it makes none. And the truth is, the next time something happens, our ability to respond to it will be less. We're in the process of cutting SNAP benefits. They're in the process of going after LIHEAP. They're in the process of cutting all of those social safety net programs that during that collapse saved millions of people from absolute poverty and homelessness. And, you know, I'm always reminded of, and I'll never get it out of my head, that Pat Toomey was asked on TV, the senator in Pennsylvania, what should have happened after the collapse. And he said there should have been a much harder down. The collapse should have been worse. Instead of 1 million people losing their jobs, 1.2 million or 1.5 million, instead of it only being for 8 months of job losses, it should have been for 2 years. Because then we could have built back up from the bottom like a phoenix. And, you know, whatever nonsense that is. But in the process, how many more millions of people lose their homes, lose their jobs, lose their futures, lose their children? You know, I remember, you know, we were having people on back in 2009 and 2010, you know, daily, you know, from home defenders and other groups who were barricading themselves in people's homes so that the sheriffs couldn't throw them out because they had nowhere to go. And we let these criminal banks do that we let them do that to us. And now we're setting that table again, setting the same scenario up to where the bankers are you know what's going to happen. Now that they're not going to have to report it, now that they're not going to have to say, hey, where that money went, there's going to be much more speculation. There's going to obviously be much more discrimination because the data that part of this, the banks have to report, you know, data on who they're lending to and where they're lending and all of that so it can be tracked. So we know all the negatives are going to happen. And the only positives, we're never going to see. The very well-to-do, they're going to line their pockets. We know that. The bankers, they're going to be fat and happy. They never lose. The house never loses. And yet here we are, again, doing the same dumb stuff. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back with Justin Duckham, Talk Media News. Stick around.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Even if you take the highest possible estimate of costs and the lowest possible estimate of benefits, benefits are still well over double what the costs were.
Trump doesn't want you to know his own report shows the benefits of environmental regulations far outweigh the costs. Colorado Republicans kill bill prioritizing public health in oil and gas development. Interior Secretary pulls lands in his own state from oil and gas auction. Plus,
it's just one after the other.
The third major storm in the Northeast in 10 days underscores the need to invest in electric grid resilience.
All of those needs and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
And we have 4 to 9 inches of global warming hoax piling up outside. Thanks, China.
Yep, thanks. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I guess it's not unheard of, but man, this is the third nor'easter about to hit the East Coast in, a week or two?
Yes, in less than 2 weeks. And that is likely to bring even more power outages, even as hundreds of thousands of customers already remain without electricity after the previous 2 storms. Back-to-back storms, as you mentioned, are rare but not unheard of for the region. But the impacts, with little time for recovery in between, underscore what climate scientists have been warning about for years. Because of the documented increase in heavy precipitation events in the United States since 1950, we need to invest in infrastructure like the electric grid. It needs to be hardened for resilience because of the increase in extreme weather events due to global warming.
And this isn't just back-to-back storms. This is back-to-back storms in the Northeast.
And intense ones at that.
Yep.
The benefits of regulations far outweigh their costs, as much as 7 times their cost, especially environmental regulations. That's the conclusion of a new report that was quietly released by President Trump's own Office of Management and Budget, which found that unequivocally, at a minimum, even when using the highest possible estimates of cost, major regulations like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act return more than double their cost in benefits to the American people. According to David Roberts of Vox on a recent broadcast, Trump's rollbacks of major environmental regulations to reduce compliance costs for corporations actually amount to a pollution tax of sorts on everyday Americans.
Air quality regulations are a downward redistribution of income. That's the right way to think about them. It's taking income out of corporate pockets and putting it into the pockets of average people who have to breathe the air. And the reversing or getting rid of these regulations is an upward income redistribution. You're taking money out of the pockets of ordinary people in the form of health costs and missed work and all the rest of it, and you're putting it in the pockets of industrialists.
So, as it turns out, when Donald Trump and Scott Pruitt and these guys all say cutting regulations is good for the economy, turns out they're lying, and their own report from their own administration now shows it?
Yep.
Imagine that.
Meanwhile, in Colorado, after heavy lobbying from the oil and gas industry, Republican lawmakers in the state legislature last week killed proposed legislation that would have required Colorado state regulators of the oil and gas industry to prioritize public safety and to treat protection of public health and the environment as a precondition before allowing further encroachment of drilling operations inside city limits and near homes and schools.
Well, we'd hate to do that.
In Utah, in the fight to save Bears Ears National Monument, internal Interior Department emails obtained in a lawsuit by the New York Times show that oil and gas were the primary motivation behind the Trump administration's decision to shrink the monument. The Trump administration had claimed early last year that its so-called monument review had no predetermined outcomes, but the internal documents tell a different story, showing that long before the review was launched, Interior Department officials were primarily focused on oil and gas exploration. Native American tribes have vowed to sue over Trump's plans to cut nearly 90% of the monument in southeastern Utah. Finally, some good news, at least for folks in Montana. Speaking of Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, he has unexpectedly withdrawn more than 17,000 acres of the public's lands from consideration for an auction of leases to the oil and natural gas industry. Local and national environmental groups had tried to stop the sale, arguing drilling in these areas would harm the Yellowstone River and other sensitive regions. Zinke said that the department needed to study the area more before putting it up for auction. I'm sure it's purely coincidental that the protected lands happen to be located in Zinke's home state,
where he's planning to run for governor. So he takes all this public land out of our national park so that it can be sold, given away to oil and gas interests. But in his own home state, he protects public land from those very same oil and gas interests.
Funny that.
For much more on all of these reports and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
This land is your land, and this land is my land, from the California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
I got news for you, and it's going
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Lots going on, lots in the streets, lots of people moseying around, protesting. Good stuff. Let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. Justin Duckham, Talk Media News. Justin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, great to be here.
So interesting day today. Thousands of kids out in the streets. Either the right wing saying, well, they're just taking a little time off from school. I'm saying these kids actually know what they're out in the streets for.
Yeah, I mean, this was a huge show all across the country. Thousands of high schools taking part in this. And in D.C. in particular, there was quite a turnout. They met down by the White House. They held a die-in. They ended up marching down to the Capitol and absolutely surrounded it and really made that be one of the major news topics of the day, something that no lawmaker could really escape without weighing in on.
Yeah, but it's just a bunch of kids who don't know what they're doing there, Justin. And they just wanted the day off school. That's right. That's all. That's all it was, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, right. No, I mean, these kids were very media savvy. They knew what they're doing. They knew how to give interviews correctly, probably much better than I've ever done. And they just came out and were very professional. And, you know, particularly compared to some of the rallies we see here in D.C., this was something that, you know, was a lot more put together and a lot more basically organized, I guess. It was a pretty impressive show of support.
Yeah, I mean, it gives me a little bit of hope for the future. And I guess there were so many people on the street that even Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, was laying down in the street in New York City in his suit, chanting along with the students there.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of politicians who wanted to get in on this today. You know, Bernie Sanders came down and was swarmed by a lot of the participants there. You know, Chuck Schumer was leading people in, you know, very Chuck Schumer-esque level enthusiasm chants. Not to be mean. But yeah, no, there was a lot of politicians who were very eager to, you know, be photographed with a lot of his supporters during this moment of time, which is, you know, probably good. You know, any support I'm sure is needed, particularly since there's been a pretty coordinated attack from the right against these people.
No, I mean, and now the reality is you got your picture taken. What are you going to actually do about it? And that's where it comes to me. I mean, I've always seen these politicians, they want to put their arms around people, but, you know, they don't really follow through. So it's going to be interesting to see how the next month plays out until, I guess, the next one, which is coming up soon.
Right, yeah, March 24th, the march. I actually thought you meant the next school shooting, which I would imagine is also coming up pretty soon, which is kind of a terrifying thing to think about. That's where my mind went immediately. Yeah, sorry. But they have certainly kept the momentum up for this. They have made this in a way where this conversation is not going away. This was one aspect of it. There's going to be another instance where they're going to be getting attention, and this is going to be a much larger protest, something that a lot of people have already been comparing to the Women's March here. And, you know, just anecdotally, the amount of people that I had reaching out to me asking if they could stay on my couch during the, you know, Women's March was pretty impressive. I have gotten, you know, requests for this almost to a level of tenfold. So I'm not sure if that's just, you know, my group of, you know, friends and colleagues and whatnot, or if that speaks, you know, volumes about what's going on. But it is going to be well attended, and it is going to be very interesting to watch, and something that is going to be keeping the story alive for much longer than we usually deal with mass shootings.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And because the right wing and the NRA and all the spin machine, they're doing their best. They're doing their darndest, but it doesn't appear this time to be working. Let's move on. I'm talking about right wing spin machine. Last night, Connor Lamb whipped Rick Sarcone. Immediately I saw this morning, well, yeah, this isn't a big deal. You know, he's a unique candidate. Not a big deal. It's not about Trump. It was a fluke. So I've seen a bunch of that stuff, and I'm going, no, a Democratic candidate beat a Republican in a district that they had no business winning.
Exactly. And, you know, Paul Ryan today tried to give a very rosy, optimistic version of what happened last night. His argument was, since there was not a, you know, primary in this race, therefore they could put forward a centrist Democrat, something that he said was, you know, not going to happen when it comes to 2018 and, you know, others get in there. And, you know, presumably there'd be those who are more willing to embrace progressive ideals and leftist credentials and whatnot. And then he also pretty much twisted history, trying to say that the president was the one who closed this race. despite the fact that this was a district that Trump won by 20% or 19% back in 2016. And, you would have to imagine that something happened between that date and last night's election. And frankly, I think, the fact that we have had a president who has been, certainly alienating a lot of people across the country, probably.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Rewrite history, saying that the president closed the race, despite the fact that, this was a district that Trump won by about 90% back in 2016. And, obviously something happened between then and between last night. And I think, frankly, it is probably the president's performance in office. So just a lot of spin coming out from the right.
I mean, the policies have been horrible. And, and I look at Saccone as a guy who ran as Trump before Trump. Mm-hmm. I was him before him with all the crazy policies, and to have that district flip like that just honestly was enormous.
Exactly. And, this was something that Trump invested time in. He went down there and gave that rally. Trump's family was there. Donald Trump Jr. wore a hairnet, which was a pretty interesting sight in itself. So, this may be sort of an inconsequential race at the end of the day. This may only last for about 8 months, and this district is no longer going to exist. But at least we got to see Donald Trump Jr. in a hairnet. So overall, it's all pretty much worth it.
Yeah, although the rally that Trump had down there was really about him. It was about his electoral win. It was about how wonderful he is. He even, he actually called the candidate lackluster at one point, and said the other guy was a good-looking guy. Not as good-looking as him, but still a good-looking guy. And you go, is that somebody you want stumping for you, who wants all of the attention, is not going to help you a bit?
Well, and of course, that's not the first time this has, happened. He campaigned for Luther Strange back in Alabama, and in the middle of that, pretty much sucked all of the oxygen out of the room and derailed the campaign when he said that he would endorse Roy Moore if Luther Strange ended up not getting the nomination. So just, somebody who you probably don't want in your corner, and who you certainly don't want to, be speaking off the cuff, since it leads to some pretty challenging moments.
Good point. Let's move on. New National Economic Council advisor, huh?
Yeah,
Larry Kudlow.
All right, yeah. Proving time and time again that Trump's top advisor is the television. We now have Larry Kudlow coming in. And this is something that has apparently been in discussions for the past couple of days. He formally made the offer last night. Kudlow was telling everybody about it today, before the White House actually got in front of the story and made it official. Something that in the Trump world is probably a little disarming for the president, but as it stands right now, he is going to be the new Economic Council advisor or director. He is apparently shifting his position on tariffs and supporting what the president is aiming for when it comes to that. A pretty remarkable shift from the views that he's previously held, and is going to be the top voice, somebody who the president has seen on television and wants to be his figurehead.
It's interesting. My question when I saw it is, why bother hiring him and paying him a salary? You could just watch him on TV for free.
I mean,
submit questions like a viewer. Trump's watching it anyway. Submit a couple of questions, have him do it on TV, save the taxpayers a couple of bucks.
Yeah, and he also he also had a moment today on CNBC where he was discussing how sad he was that he was going to be no longer appearing there 3 to 4 times a day. But considering that Trump hires people solely to go on television, as was the case with Sebastian Gorka, it's probably a safe bet that we're going to be seeing Larry Kudlow probably just as much as ever.
Well, wasn't that the argument for choosing him, that he was going to improve Trump's ratings?
I mean, that I would not put it past him. That sounds like sort of a page from the Trump White House.
It's just absolutely crazy. Last line of questioning. The new poll evidently out. Stormy Daniels more popular with evangelicals than with atheists. Is that right?
Actually, so here's a new poll from Politico Morning Consult. 42% of evangelical voters said that their view of Trump is unchanged by the Stormy Daniels scandal. 28% said it is less favorable, and 15% now hold a more favorable view of Donald Trump because of this scandal. Now,
no, come on.
These are real numbers from the polling that was conducted a little bit earlier this month. And, you know, the fun part here is that among atheists, 41% hold Trump in a less favorable light, 34% have unchanged views, and only 6% view him more favorably. So when it comes to these, you know, moralistic value voters and whatnot, there's a pretty interesting split here. And, you know, at the end of the day, it may just kind of show that evangelicalism may not actually be about, you know, what they say it is.
Well, I mean, you look at some of those really hyper evangelical states, some of the most religious states have some of the highest consumption of porn in the entire country. So I got to be honest, not all that surprised. She could be, you know, one of their fantasy girls, and you know, you got Trump who, Trump, I know her.
I mean, 15% of those may be very well thinking that.
Wow.
Just don't lie.
What a crazy world we live in.
Yep.
Crazy times. Justin, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Our good friend Justin Duckham, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day that participants in the famed Bread and Roses strike gathered in Lawrence, Massachusetts to celebrate their victory. The strike had begun in January and was a hard-fought battle. More than 20,000 textile workers, most of them women, speaking more than 20 languages, participated in the action. It was a powerful stand of workers' solidarity across ethnic lines. On March 12th, the American Woolen Company agreed to most of the strikers' demands. In the days that followed, other companies also agreed to terms. The workers gained between 5 and 25% raises depending on their jobs. They also gained overtime pay. The ripples of this impact flowed throughout New England. It's estimated that 150,000 textile workers saw raises in the aftermath of the historic work action. At the gathering to commemorate the strike, leader of the industrial workers of the world, Big Bill Haywood, addressed the crowd saying, "You are the heart and soul of the working class. You, the strikers of Lawrence, have won the most signal victory of any organized body of working men in the world. You have demonstrated that there is a common interest in the working class that can bring all its members together." Despite the significance of this strike, the story is not taught in many of our schools. In 2011, the Zinn Education Project found that only 2 of the 10 major U.S. history textbooks discussed the strike. Today, let's take a minute to remember those brave women who declared, "Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too." For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
So CNN reported earlier today that the Defense Department spent more than $138,000 on Trump-branded properties just in the first 8 months of his presidency. And you go, 138,000, that's not a lot of money. It's not a big deal. From January 20th to August 31st of 2017, about 95% of that money there were no receipts for. So we don't know if they actually provided services or not. It didn't release their extensive, their trip record summaries. I mean, it did, but it didn't go into details. For some of the stays in Miami, Panama, and Washington, D.C. A hotel, a night rent there at the Miami hotel, $119 to $270 a night. They found that military spending was about a third of it, and what appears to be spent at the Mar-a-Lago Club in Palm Beach. You go, what? Secret Service spent about $64,000 at Mar-a-Lago between February and April of 2017 for the big golf outings. And you go, well, it's not a lot of money. It's not a big deal, is it? They found one of the Trump properties in Washington, D.C. Someone paid $900 for a one-night stay. And you go, well, he deserves a little bit. He's president. He deserves a little something. He only makes $400,000 a year. That's all. That's not a lot. Then we find out today, the American Petroleum Institute, they're having their annual board meeting, which could be about 200 people. And you think about, 200 people at, $200-300 a night, all the meals, all the stuff. That's a nice little chunk of change, right? So they're going to have their little 2-day shindig, and then guess what they're going to do? They're going to march right over to the White House. And they're not going to have to, have die-ins out in the street, and they're not going to have to surround the building and hold hands and sing songs to be heard. No. They're going to be escorted right in. And they're going to push their policies. So you got to ask the question, at what point do we admit that we're allowing the Trump organization to make tons of money off of our backs? And is it a conflict of interest? Knowing what we know about Trump, do you wonder if it's not a, hey, thanks for staying at my hotel, guys. I'll give you whatever you want now. Kind of makes you wonder. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. Lots to get to tomorrow. We'll see you then.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming.